I am about to tell you how a simple walk into a small convenience store turned into the most confusing and terrifying experience of my life, and why I still don't understand how that building ever appeared where it did. I want you to stay with me because every part of this story leads to something stranger than the last, and the ending still haunts me every time I think about it. What happened inside that store felt normal at first, but every little detail grew more twisted the longer I stayed inside. I should have turned around the moment I stepped through the door, but I didn't know I was crossing into something that didn't belong to this timeline at all. It started on a cold Thursday evening when I was driving back from work, feeling hungry and too tired to cook anything at home. The sky was already dark, and the road ahead was almost empty except for a few distant headlights passing like drifting ghosts. I remembered there was usually a gas station a few miles ahead, so I decided to stop and grab something quick to eat. When I reached the area where it should have been, I found a small corner store instead, a place I had never seen before. The building looked old, but strangely clean, like it had been frozen in time and placed there just minutes earlier. A bright red neon sign on top flickered the words, Hilltop Market, even though the surrounding land was flat and wide for miles. Something felt off, because I had driven this same road for years and had never once seen a store there. I pulled into the small gravel lot anyway, telling myself I was just tired and not paying attention. When I stepped out of my car, the air around me felt oddly warm compared to the cold night breeze I had felt just seconds earlier. It was like the space around the store had its own temperature, isolated and strange, as if it didn't match the rest of the world. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should leave right then, but hunger and curiosity pushed me forward. The moment I touched the door handle, a soft electrical shock ran through my palm. I pulled my hand back and stared at it, feeling confused but telling myself it was just static electricity. The handle looked perfectly normal, smooth metal with no visible wiring or anything that could cause a shock. I took a deep breath, grabbed the handle again, and pushed the door open slowly. The faint sound of a bell above the door chimed, echoing longer than it should have, as if the air inside was thicker somehow. When I stepped inside, I was surprised by how bright the lights were and how clean everything looked, almost unnaturally clean. The aisles were perfectly organized, with every label facing forward in ideal alignment, like someone had measured each one with a ruler. The smell inside the store reminded me of my childhood, something like lemon cleaner mixed with old wooden floors, even though there was no wood anywhere. Behind the counter stood a man who looked to be in his late 60s, staring at me with a soft smile that felt polite but uneasy. His eyes followed me in a way that made me feel like he already knew who I was, even though I had never seen him before in my life. He wore a green vest with the store's name stitched on it, but the stitching looked hand-sewn rather than printed. I nodded slightly at him, not wanting to be rude, and made my way down the first aisle. At first, it all seemed like a regular store, but a few seconds later, I realized the items on the shelves made no sense. Most of the products had brands that did not exist, at least not brands I had ever heard of in my entire life. There were bags of chips labeled Crispo Bite, canned meats with old-fashioned fonts, and soda bottles with strange descriptions like carbonated herbal sweet water. The labels looked too modern to be vintage, but too old to be recent, which left me trapped in the confusion of something that shouldn't exist. I picked up a candy bar to inspect it, and the moment I touched it, the wrapper felt unreal, like the texture didn't match the appearance. The more I explored, the more I noticed little details that pushed my confusion into fear. The expiration dates on everything ended in numbers I had never seen used before, like 19-47-87 or 046203. The more I stared at them, the more they looked like dates, but not dates from our calendar. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine as I set the candy bar back and wiped my hand against my jeans. I decided to grab a bottle of water and head straight to the counter, hoping to leave as quickly as possible before my imagination got the best of me. But before I could reach the counter, I noticed a door in the back of the store that I had not seen before, no matter how many times I had looked up. It was slightly open, and a soft blue light leaked through the gap like a weak glow from another room. Something about it pulled my attention, an instinctive pressure like someone whispering to open it. I took a step forward, but the old man behind the counter suddenly spoke with a firm voice that made me freeze in place. "That door is not for customers," he said, without raising his voice but with a tone that carried absolute finality. I turned toward him slowly, suddenly aware of the tightness in my chest as if the air had shifted around me again. He didn't look angry, but his eyes were sharp and focused, almost warning. I nodded quickly, pretending I had just been curious, and placed the water bottle on the counter. The man scanned it with a device that looked like a mix between a modern scanner and an old cash register. Something caught between two technologies that should never exist together. The price flashed on the small screen, but the numbers looked strange, like symbols rather than digits. When he handed me the change, the coins were unlike any currency I had ever seen before. I stared at the coins for a second, noticing that each one had a different symbol on it, none resembling anything familiar from any country I knew. Before I could ask him anything, the man said softly, "Don't keep those. They're not for here." Confusion twisted in my stomach because I didn't understand what he meant, nor did I understand what here referred to. I slowly placed the coins back on the counter and he swept them into a small drawer without another word. His silence and calmness terrified me more than if he had shouted. I grabbed the water bottle and headed toward the exit, feeling an overwhelming urge to get out of that place. As I reached the door, I heard the bell above it chime again, but this time it sounded distorted like an echo underwater. When my feet touched the gravel outside, I felt cold again, realizing I had been strangely warm the entire time inside. But something was wrong the moment I stepped away from the door. My car was no longer in the parking lot, and the gravel area looked larger, almost emptier than before. The streetlights that had lined the road were now gone, leaving the area darker than it had been when I arrived. Panic rose in my chest as I turned back toward the store, only to see that the neon sign was flickering more violently. I walked quickly back to the door, pulled it open, and stepped inside again, but what I saw made my stomach twist. The store was pitch black with no lights, no aisles, and no shelves, just an empty, abandoned interior filled with dust and broken tiles. The bell above the door didn't ring this time, and the silence in the room felt too thick, like stepping into forgotten air. It was as if the store had been empty for decades. I looked around desperately, trying to understand how the entire place had transformed so drastically in just a few seconds. Dust covered the floor so heavily that it looked untouched for years, and spiderwebs hung from the ceiling like long gray curtains. The back door, the one with the blue light, was still there, but now it was completely shut and covered in dust like it had never been opened. A heavy dread settled into my stomach as I backed up toward the entrance again. I stepped outside and looked around, trying to find something familiar, but nothing made sense. The road looked the same as always, but my car was still missing, and even the trees nearby felt different, older somehow. I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like the air was changing around me again, shifting something unseen. I turned around to check the store one more time, and my breath caught in my throat. The neon sign was completely gone, replaced by a rusty metal frame with no wiring or lights attached to it. The walls of the store looked decayed, cracked, and covered in chipped paint that hadn't been touched for years. It was impossible because I had just bought a bottle of water there minutes ago, and the place had been spotless. I felt my heart pounding so hard that it almost hurt. I looked down at the water bottle in my hand and froze. The label was blank, completely empty, just a clear piece of plastic wrapped around the bottle with no text, no brand, and no markings. The cap was sealed, but something inside the bottle looked thicker than water, almost shimmering like a faint silver liquid. My entire body locked up, and every instinct I had screamed to throw it away. Before I could react, I heard a soft voice behind me say, "Don't drink that." I spun around, but no one was there, just the empty parking lot and the silent, decayed store. The voice had sounded like the old man, but softer, almost distant, like he was speaking through a wall. I turned back toward the road and finally saw headlights approaching from far away. A wave of relief washed over me because I thought it was someone who could help me, maybe even explain what I had experienced. When the car reached me, I waved it down, shouting for help as it slowed. The driver rolled down the window, and I saw a man in his 30s staring at me with confusion and mild concern. He asked what I was doing standing alone outside an abandoned store after midnight. Midnight. That word echoed in my mind because I had left work at 6 p.m., and the sky had still been dark from winter, not because of midnight. I checked my phone and felt my blood turn cold when the screen showed 12:03 a.m., even though the battery had been full earlier, now showing only 3% left. I told the driver everything, stumbling over my words as I pointed at the store behind me. He looked at the building and shook his head slowly, telling me that the store had been closed for over 30 years after a fire had destroyed most of the interior. He said nobody had ever rebuilt it, and nobody had ever reopened anything on that land since then. I turned slowly toward the store, my mind unable to understand how I had been inside it earlier, buying water from a man who shouldn't exist. The driver told me to get in the car so he could take me home safely. I climbed inside, still clutching the strange bottle in my hand, too terrified to let go of it. The man kept glancing at me as he drove, asking if I was sure I hadn't imagined everything, because sometimes the mind creates strange illusions when tired. But I knew I had not imagined anything, because the smell, the lights, the old man, and the products had all felt too real. I sat quietly, staring at the road ahead as my heart slowly calmed. When he dropped me at my house, I thanked him and stepped out, but before closing the door, he looked at the bottle in my hand and frowned. He said, "Make sure you get rid of that," but before I could ask why, he drove away quickly, almost nervously. I entered my house, locked the door, and turned on every light in the living room because the silence felt too thick. I placed the bottle on the table and stared at it for several minutes without blinking. A sudden vibration startled me, and I picked up my phone, seeing a single text message from an unknown number. It read, "Do not open the bottle. It doesn't belong to your timeline." My heart slammed against my ribs as the message disappeared before I could screenshot it, vanishing from my inbox like it had never existed. I checked the time again, noticing that my clock flickered for a moment before returning to normal. I didn't sleep that night, and I kept checking the bottle every few minutes to see if anything had changed. The liquid inside continued to shine with that faint silver glow, like something alive was floating in it. At one moment, I could almost swear the bottle felt warm, even though the room was cold. I backed away from it slowly, feeling a rising dread I couldn't explain. By morning, I had made a decision to get rid of the bottle, but when I checked the table, the bottle was gone. I searched the entire house, every room, every drawer, every corner, but it had vanished without a trace. My phone buzzed again with another message from the same unknown number saying, "It's back where it should be. But you're not done yet." The message disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I stood there frozen, realizing that whatever I stepped into wasn't finished with me, not even close. The store might be gone, but something from it clearly followed me home, something that belonged to a different reality. I don't know if it will ever appear again, but sometimes at night, I still hear the faint sound of that same store bell echoing from somewhere in my house. And every time I hear it, I wonder if the next time I open a door, I'll find myself somewhere I'm not supposed to be. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Time Traveling Stories, because what comes next might be even stranger than this.